today we are strapping in for a deep dive into what remains one of the most stunning chapters in cybercrime history. We're talking about the sudden and really the spectacular implosion of AlphaBay.
Oh, absolutely. This was a centralized criminal empire that, for years, just seemed untouchable. It was operating with total impunity, right under the nose of global law enforcement.
And we're not just talking about a big market. This was,
No.
well, this was monumental.
Monumental is the right word. AlphaBay was the largest darknet marketplace the world had ever seen. It was facilitating transactions worth, well over $1 billion in crypto between late 2014 and mid-2017.
$1 billion.
Yeah, and to really grasp the scale, just think about its predecessor, Silk Road.
The famous one everyone knows.
Exactly. Silk Road had roughly 14,000 listings when it was seized. AlphaBay was, by some estimates, 10 times that size.
10 times.
10 times. In user base, in listing volume. It's a whole different league.
That sheer growth is incredible. It really shows how quickly that whole dark web criminal economy matured. And, our focus today is to dissect the master plan behind its downfall. We're talking about a massive, globally coordinated sting operation known as Operation Bayonet.
Right.
And the mission of this operation was critical, wasn't it? It was all about figuring out how law enforcement could turn the dark web's greatest defense, that ability to regenerate what we call the Hydra effect, into its biggest vulnerability. They set this global trap that, well, it ultimately netted thousands of criminals worldwide.
And what's really crucial to understand here is that Operation Bayonet, it was driven by more than just fighting cybercrime. I mean, AlphaBay had very quickly evolved into the leading distributor of lethal narcotics.
Things like fentanyl.
Exactly. Potent substances like fentanyl, high-purity heroin. For U.S. authorities, this wasn't just some legal or technical challenge. It was treated, and explicitly so, as a severe public health crisis.
Because the link was direct.
The digital drug trade facilitated by AlphaBay was being linked directly to numerous overdose deaths across the United States. That public safety mandate gave law enforcement the urgency, the political backing, and, the resources for this overwhelming, unprecedented international response. It really set the stage for one of the most complex interdiction operations ever mounted.
Okay, so let's unpack this enormous enterprise. Let's try and understand why it became such a high-priority target. We're starting in Section 1, looking at the zenith, the apex of criminal e-commerce. So when you hear AlphaBay described as the Amazon.com of the dark web, it's not hyperbole, is it?
Not at all, no. That description really captures the sense of professionalism, the reliability, and just the sheer scale they achieved. It elevated them so far above the sort of amateur operations that came before them.
That analogy's perfect.
Yeah, because it speaks to their command of the market. They offered a user experience and a logistical framework that felt structured, efficient, despite the entirely illicit nature of the goods.
So what were the numbers looking like at its peak?
Well, by July 2017, just before the collapse, the numbers documenting their dominance were just staggering. The platform had registered over 400,000 users.
400,000.
And managing that massive customer base was a network of approximately 40,000 sellers or vendors. So essentially, 40,000 independent businesses, all operating under the AlphaBay umbrella.
That's the population of a major city, an entire city operating in the criminal shadows. So what did that sprawling, dark storefront actually contain?
The catalog was astonishingly vast and disturbingly specialized. They had approximately 300,000 items listed for sale.
300,000?
Yeah. And the majority, about 250,000 of those listings, were dedicated to illegal drugs and toxic chemicals.
Which included, as you said, those lethal opioids.
Right, the ones driving that public health crisis. The remaining 100,000 listings, though, they covered the whole spectrum of serious cyber-enabled crime.
Okay, tell us more about that non-narcotic side, because I feel like that's where the real sophistication of the platform shines through.
It absolutely is. That 100,000 included stolen and fraudulent RD documents, counterfeit goods, specialized malware, remote access tools, zero-day exploits, even firearms.
Wow.
But the specialization was the key. For instance, the section that was dedicated to identity theft and financial data wasn't just a simple dumping ground for lists of stolen credit cards.
Yeah.
No, it was a highly configured, almost surgical tool dedicated to identity theft and financial crime.
What made that financial crime section so powerful for criminals? What could they actually do with it?
It was the organization. The buyers, and we're often talking about large organized crime rings here, they can filter listings for stolen IDs, credit card numbers, bank account logins, but incredibly specific criteria.
Like what?
You could search by location, by state, but whether a social security number was available. You could even filter by the person's credit score or their credit limit and by the exact bank they used.
That's terrifying. So it allowed criminals to just efficiently source the exact, high-value data packets they needed for large-scale targeted fraud.
It completely streamlined their logistics, the whole process.
That capability, being able to curate stolen information based on its financial value, it shows that AlphaBay wasn't just facilitating transactions, it was acting as a high-tech data broker for organized crime.
And that operational tempo, as you can imagine, led to staggering financial figures. The platform was generating between $600,000 and $800,000 in daily transactions. Daily. Predominantly in cryptocurrency. This ensured that, over its entire run, the total volume of illicit transactions exceeded $1 billion. This wasn't a shadow economy. It was a multi-billion-dollar economy operating completely outside of any global financial or regulatory oversight.
But that scale was only possible because of the operational sophistication they built. So what did AlphaBay introduce that truly professionalized this criminal e-commerce space?
They were constantly innovating. They had to build trust and anonymity. First, the payment system. They accepted Bitcoin, of course, but they recognized the increasing threat of blockchain forensics.
Right, the police were getting better at tracing Bitcoin.
They were. So in August 2016, they implemented support for Monero.
Okay, let's pause on Monero for a second. Why was that move so strategically important for them?
Well, Bitcoin's ledger is public. I mean, while wallet owners are pseudonymous, once an identity is linked to a wallet, all past and future transactions can be tracked. That's blockchain forensics in a nutshell.
Right.
Monero, however, uses techniques like ring signatures and stealth addresses. Ring signatures mix the sender's transaction with others, which obscures the source, and stealth addresses generate a unique, one-time address for every single transaction.
So it makes tracing the flow of funds exceptionally difficult.
Exceptionally difficult, even for advanced law enforcement agencies. By embracing Monero, AlphaBay was proactively addressing the biggest vulnerability that those early markets faced.
It was a direct countermeasure against the rising tide of law enforcement's crypto tracing capabilities.
Exactly. But beyond the currency, they had to address the critical issue of trust in a marketplace full of criminals who are all trying to scam each other.
Of course.
So they introduced non-standard features like customizable digital contracts. These systems allowed buyers and sellers to establish complex agreements, commit to future services, and importantly, build transferable reputations that were crucial for long-term vendor stability.
It sounds like they were trying to import the robustness of a legitimate e-commerce platform like, eBay's seller ratings and contract assurance
That's the perfect comparison.
into the darkest corner of the internet.
That was precisely the goal. To normalize the transaction process, to reduce internal fraud, which is the systemic risk for all darknet markets. And that combination of massive scale, sophisticated financial anonymity through Monero, and professionalized dispute resolution made AlphaBay incredibly resilient. Until the sheer scale of the operation drew the unwavering attention of the world's most powerful law enforcement agencies.
And this is where the narrative shifts, doesn't it? It goes from high-tech sophistication to just astonishing human error. Because despite their million-dollar security and their billion-dollar operation, the key to their collapse was utterly mundane. Let's move into Section 2, the kingpin's Achilles heel. The man who allegedly built this entire empire, who was capable of managing complex crypto architecture and global logistics. He was Alexandre Cazes, a 25-year-old Canadian living in Thailand. He used the aliases Alpha2 and Admin.
And it's so difficult to reconcile the technical mastery required to build AlphaBay with the stunning, truly elementary operational security, or OPSEC, failure that led to his capture.
The contrast is just profound.
It is. Cazes possessed all the skills: programming, cryptography, server administration, everything necessary to run a darknet market anonymously. Yet he failed at the very first rule of digital compartmentation.
Never reuse personal information.
Never. His mistake was reusing his personal, highly identifiable Hotmail address.
The infamous address, pimplex91@hotmail.com.
That's the one.
That username alone suggests a degree of youthful hubris that certainly did not translate into good security practice.
It was the root cause problem, and it dated right back to the market's infancy. This exact Hotmail address was used as the from address in system-generated emails sent to AlphaBay users.
What kind of emails?
Specifically, password reset and welcome emails. This practice began in December 2014, right when the site launched, And it just continued for years.
Hold on. So for 3 years, every user who signed up, every drug vendor, every identity thief, they received an email confirmation that, in its header information, contained the real-world identity of the kingpin, disguised only by that regrettable username.
Precisely. And once investigators discovered this recurring Hotmail address in the site's communications in late 2016, the digital breadcrumbs started connecting the pseudonym to the physical person with alarming speed.
How direct was that path from the Hotmail address to the physical arrest? What was the chain of evidence?
Oh, the path was devastatingly direct, because Cazes had been just as careless on the clear net. The email address, pimplex91@hotmail.com, was linked to his real name, Alexandra Cazes, in multiple public and semi-public forums.
Where?
It appeared on his LinkedIn profile, where he was advertising his website design and computer repair skills. And critically, it was also tied to his legitimate Canadian business, EBX Technologies.
So he was actively advertising his identity and his technical skills to the public using the same contact information he used to run his billion-dollar criminal enterprise.
It's not just sloppiness.
No, it's an active violation of the most basic security principles.
And it just continued to unravel from there. The email was connected to a PayPal account, which then linked directly to Canadian bank accounts in Cazes' name and his company's name. But maybe the most damning early mistake came from his alias, Alpha2.
What about it?
Well, back in 2008, Cazes used that alias in a post on a French-language tech forum, a post that included his full name, Alexandre Cazes, and...
Let me guess. That exact Hotmail address.
Yeah, exact Hotmail address.
So he created this immutable link between his real identity, his criminal persona, and his technical identity, all through that single email, nearly a decade before AlphaBay even existed. It's a textbook case of how historical data leakage can just haunt an anonymous operation.
Yeah, the security researcher known as the Grug noted that this single minor error made years earlier was reported to police in 2016, and that was enough. It was enough to bring down the entirety of the dark web's largest market. The failure of compartmentation just ensured that any mistake immediately linked the platform directly to a real criminally liable identity, completely bypassing all the technical safeguards of Tor and Monero.
And law enforcement then translated this digital footprint into that dramatic physical capture in Bangkok on July 5th, 2017. And they didn't just wait for him to make a mistake, did they? They engineered one.
They did. It was a very clever operational tactic. U.S. and Thai authorities had been monitoring AlphaBay's infrastructure. And they noticed that Cazes often performed administrative tasks himself when things went wrong. So they deliberately orchestrated an artificial system failure on one of the AlphaBay servers.
They created a fake crisis to draw the kingpin out, forcing him to log in and try to fix it.
Exactly. So when Thai police, assisted by FBI and DEA agents, raided his luxury home, Cazes was actively logged into his laptop as admin, frantically trying to troubleshoot the system failure that they had caused.
And the crucial, mind-boggling detail, especially for a man who championed Monero and I2P anonymity,
was that his laptop was found open and unencrypted.
I have to ask, for a person running an operation of this complexity, is it even feasible that his core operational laptop was genuinely unencrypted, or was there maybe some kind of quick decryption failure when they seized it?
The official reports all indicate it was open and unencrypted at the moment of capture. It's a classic act of hubris or maybe over-reliance on the physical security of being in a foreign country. He clearly believed that if he was physically safe, the digital contents didn't matter.
And that mistake gave them everything.
Everything. That unencrypted laptop provided investigators with immediate, unhindered access to the absolute heart of AlphaBay's operations. Server credentials, passwords, the market's database access keys, and potentially the cold storage crypto wallet keys.
That's essentially handing over the keys to the entire billion-dollar kingdom. This immediate intelligence harvest was so vital for what followed, right? It allowed all the international partners to seize AlphaBay's distributed infrastructure across countries like Canada, Lithuania, France.
Simultaneously. It was crucial. It prevented any possibility of a distributed system-wide data wipe or an exit scam by Cazes' subordinates. And furthermore, the evidence haul was so comprehensive because the laptop also contained an unencrypted personal net worth statement.
An unencrypted financial roadmap of all his illicit gains. You're kidding.
I'm not. This document mapped out all of Cazes' global assets. It listed physical properties, cryptocurrency holdings across multiple jurisdictions: Thailand, Liechtenstein, Cyprus, Antigua.
So this was an even bigger OPSEC failure than the Hotmail address. It directly guided law enforcement through the whole asset seizure phase.
It did. It showed his immense wealth. Millions in crypto, luxury vehicles, residences, even a hotel. It just demonstrated that his pursuit of extreme wealth completely overrode any basic security discipline.
The ultimate irony being that Monero couldn't save him because the paper trail, albeit digital paper, was already laid out in plain text.
Cazes was due to face U.S. extradition on 14 very serious counts. However, he died in custody on July 12, 2017, in a suspected suicide. But the financial pursuit, that didn't end there. Authorities pursued and seized the assets that were outlined in that net worth statement, and his wife was later charged with money laundering. The Hotmail address set the hunt in motion, but the unencrypted laptop provided the tactical victory they needed for the complete takedown.
So the kingpin was captured, the site was shuttered, and the financial trail was secured. But neutralizing the leader was only the first and maybe the easier half of the strategy. The real battle was just beginning, neutralizing the global criminal network itself. Let's look at Section 3, Operation Bayonet, the global architecture of interdiction. So Operation Bayonet was never just conceived as a simple police raid. It had to be a global, synchronized action because the criminal infrastructure was designed to be resilient by being distributed. How on earth did law enforcement achieve this unprecedented level of international coordination?
This is exactly why Operation Bayonet is viewed as a watershed moment. It set the template for how transnational cybercrime has to be tackled. The operation was led by the United States, the DOJ, FBI, DEA, IRS, CIA, but it required the active participation of 11 agencies across at least 6 key nations, all working in perfect harmony.
Synchronizing legal and physical action across that many jurisdictions, I mean, it must be a logistical nightmare. Who were the key nations involved and what roles did they play?
It was truly multilateral. Thailand was critical for the physical capture of Cazes.
Right.
The Netherlands was essential for the subsequent covert operation we're about to discuss. Lithuania and France held key server infrastructure. Canada was involved in raiding Cazes' ClearWeb company, EBX Technologies, and seizing local servers. The UK provided key intelligence. Each country had different laws about digital evidence and search warrants, but they all had to agree on the common legal framework established by the U.S. indictment.
So who was the central nervous system? Who was making sure that a server seizure in Vilnius didn't prematurely alert an accomplice in Bangkok?
That role belongs squarely to Europol. Europol established a centralized, secure command post in The Hague, and it was staffed by representatives from all the primary agencies, FBI, DEA, DOJ, the Dutch, and German police.
The central hub.
It was the hub. It facilitated real-time, secure information exchange, which was absolutely non-negotiable. If the arrests and seizures weren't executed simultaneously worldwide, Cazes' team would have immediately initiated data destruction across the remaining servers, just erasing all the evidence. Europol was the secure communication backbone that ensured the complete synchronization.
And the legal approach also matched that global scope. They didn't treat this like a small-time hacking case.
Absolutely not. The indictment filed in the Eastern District of California on June 1st, 2017 was a statement. It was a statement about how darknet operations are now classified as organized crime. Cazes was charged with 14 counts, including conspiracy to engage in racketeering, or plus 6 counts of narcotics distribution, identity theft, access device fraud, money laundering conspiracy, the works.
Okay, let's look at that RACO charge for a second. That's usually reserved for, traditional mafia organizations. What made running a website qualify as a racketeering enterprise?
Well, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RACO, it targets enterprises that operate through a pattern of illegal activity. In this case, the enterprise was AlphaBay itself. It profited directly from facilitating a pattern of underlying criminal activities, drug trafficking, fraud, money laundering, all conducted across state and international lines.
So applying RACO was a signal.
It was a signal that the U.S. DOJ viewed the decentralized admin team and the vendor network of AlphaBay as a cohesive, transnational criminal organization that deserved the severest penalties available.
And beyond the arrests, that financial warfare element was essential. You have to destroy the profitability of the model. How successful was that synchronized financial seizure?
Hugely successful. And again, completely dependent on global cooperation. The seizure involved not only shutting down physical servers, but freezing and preserving millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrencies.
Bitcoin, Monero,
Ethereum, Zcash. Law enforcement had matured to the point where they could trace these flows.
Even the Monero,
Though it was more challenging. While Monero obscured transactions on the blockchain, The physical act of exchanging Monero back into fiat currency or even into traceable Bitcoin, that often involves centralized exchanges.
Which are vulnerable.
They are vulnerable to judicial process. And furthermore, as we discussed, Cazes' unencrypted financial statement provided a direct map to his holding wallets, which just rendered the technical defenses of the coin completely useless. The successful asset forfeiture, which targeted his properties and holdings across multiple tax havens like Cyprus and Antigua, it demonstrated that law enforcement had developed the global legal mechanisms to liquidate a crypto criminal's fortune.
So this global cooperation was a necessary, complex hammer to shut down the centralized infrastructure. But the true genius of Operation Bayonet, the move that shocked the entire criminal community, lay in Section 4. It wasn't enough to cut off the head.
No, they had to poison the well. We need to talk about the strategic deception, because the success of Bayonet depended entirely on weaponizing the inevitable criminal reaction.
Let's move to it. Section 4. The strategic deception weaponizing the Hydra effect. The Hydra challenge.
Yeah.
It's the dark web's defining defense mechanism, right? As long as criminal demand exists, you shut down one market and the users just flow like water into the next available platform. The market leader is replaced almost instantly. So how did Operation Bayonet overcome this historical failure?
They engineered the flow. The key to Operation Bayonet was the synchronization with the takedown of AlphaBay's chief rival, Hansa Market. Law enforcement knew that panic would drive the AlphaBay refugees toward the next stable market.
And what was the timeline of that deception?
The timeline is absolutely critical. So the U.S.-led seizure of AlphaBay and the arrest of Cazes happened on July 5th, 2017. It was widely reported.
Right, everyone knew about it.
What was not known until weeks later was that the Dutch National Police, in a completely separate, highly secretive operation, had already covertly taken over and been operating Hansa Market since early June 2017.
Wait, so for weeks before the public even knew AlphaBay was doomed, the police were secretly running its biggest European competitor.
That's right.
How? How on earth did the Dutch police gain covert control of Hansa?
They used a very sophisticated infiltration strategy. Hansa was operating out of an obscure server location in Lithuania. Through international cooperation, they gained physical access to the server. And once they had that, they could covertly seize control and replace the existing administrators with their own personnel. They ran the market under their own administration, mirroring its exact look and feel.
So when AlphaBay vanished on July 5th, the criminal user base, the 400,000 customers, the 40,000 vendors, they did exactly what was expected. They fled in panic.
And they flocked to Hansa Market, believing it was the only viable, safe refuge now that the competition was suddenly gone.
That is strategic genius. They went from the frying pan of an FBI-led bust straight into the fire of a Dutch police-run honeypot.
For 2 weeks, in July 2017, Hansa Market was the single largest, most perfectly executed intelligence trap in the history of darknet interdiction.
What were the Dutch police doing during those 2 weeks while thousands of these AlphaBay refugees poured in?
They were harvesting data on an unprecedented scale. They modified Hansa's underlying code. And this wasn't just passive monitoring, it was an active modification to ensure logging. They specifically coded the market to log critical user data that would bypass the anonymity of Tor.
Okay, so what specific data points were they targeting with these code modifications?
They were targeting any point of centralization or trust. This included private messages exchanged between buyers and sellers, which provided detailed conspiracy evidence, real-world names, locations. Crucially, they logged passwords, and most importantly, the IP addresses of the migrating user base, especially those who failed to use VPNs or made other OPSEC errors during login. They were essentially creating a massive international address book of criminals.
That IP address logging is the real killer blow against Tor anonymity, isn't it? If you're logging in and your IP is captured, the entire protective stack just collapses regardless of how strong the encryption is.
The covert operation successfully bypassed the inherent anonymity challenges by compromising the centralized point of trust, the administrative control of the market itself. By running the site, the Dutch police were collecting evidence on their own servers, legally authorized through their initial seizure.
And the revelation of this deception was timed perfectly. They didn't announce the Hansa seizure until after the flow of refugees had peaked and the data harvesting was complete.
The public announcement of the Hansa seizure followed the AlphaBay announcement by about 2 weeks, around July 19th and 20th, 2017, and the revelation confirmed the scale of the intelligence harvest. Authorities had collected data on over 10,000 buyer addresses and seized 1,000 Bitcoin that was being held in escrow.
So they achieved a true double blow. They decimated the largest market, and then they simultaneously detonated the primary lifeboat the criminal community depended on. What was the immediate impact on user trust?
Devastating. The psychological impact on the criminal underworld was immense. Users realized they weren't just vulnerable to technical mistakes, but that the centralized platforms they relied on could literally be weaponized tools of the police. In this strategy, it provided law enforcement with years of investigative leads. The data they collected fueled later operations, like Operation Spectre, leading to hundreds of arrests worldwide. It severely damaged user confidence in the integrity of all centralized markets for a long, long time.
The ultimate betrayal in a world already predicated on mistrust. But, as we know, criminal demand is persistent. So this shock led to a scramble for security and a brief return to fragmentation. Let's move to Section 5. Post-bayonet resilience and the refugees plan, the evolution of the dark web. The month following that dual takedown must have been just chaotic. Where did the hundreds of thousands of panicked darknet users and vendors go when both AlphaBay and Hansa were publicly revealed as compromised?
Well, the short-term response was a mass migration to the few remaining stable markets. Dream Market, which had been around since 2013, became the immediate beneficiary. It consolidated the majority of the displaced users.
So it became the dominant global market for a while.
It did, showing the dark web's immediate resilience. Until it, too, closed in 2019 under pressure from international law enforcement operations.
So the Hydra was wounded and scattered, but it certainly wasn't dead. We've seen this cyclical nature of market dominance and disruption continue relentlessly since Operation Bayonet.
Oh, that cycle persists because the profits are just so vast. The takedown forced markets to professionalize their OPSEC, but the kingpin model remained vulnerable. Post-Bayonet, we saw the rise of Hydra, the Russian language market.
Which became the biggest ever by volume.
By total volume, yeah. Estimated at a staggering $5.2 billion before it was seized by German and U.S. authorities, primarily through complex financial tracing.
And then there was Wall Street Market.
Right, Wall Street Market rose to prominence briefly before its admins executed an $11 million exit scam, which was then followed by their subsequent arrests.
And more recently.
More recently, we've seen major European markets like Archetype taken down by operations like Deep Sentinel, and specialized sites like Biden Cash, which focused on high-profile carding fraud. They were seized as well.
So today we see active markets like Porzon and these hyper-specialized financial fraud platforms like STYX. The flow continues, but the architecture keeps shifting. That pattern proves that the centralized Amazon-style market remains an existential vulnerability, a single point of failure that law enforcement will always target. And speaking of vulnerability, 4 years after the original bust, one of the original AlphaBay leaders attempted to defy history. The AlphaBay relaunch.
This is one of the boldest attempts at a dark web resurrection we've ever seen. In August 2021, an individual using the alias DeSnake relaunched AlphaBay.
DeSnake.
And DeSnake claimed to be a self-described co-founder and the original security administrator of the first site. He was a refugee who had escaped Operation Bayonet.
So the relaunch was essentially a marketing campaign built on saying, we've learned from the Hotmail mistake.
That was the core message, 100%. DeSnake explicitly acknowledged Alexander Cazes' OPSEC failures and vowed a fundamental redesign based on a higher emphasis on operation security. He famously declared, "There is no overkill when it comes to site security. AlphaBay 2.0 was designed to neutralize every single failure that had brought down the original."
Okay, let's detail those adaptations. What specific measures did AlphaBay 2.0 introduce to achieve that longevity and prevent a repeat of Operation Bayonet?
They focused on 3 key areas: fund security, anonymity, and, interestingly, political avoidance.
Okay, fund security first.
On fund security, they introduced something called AlphaGuard. This was an advanced system that allegedly allowed users to withdraw their cryptocurrency funds even if all the market servers were seized simultaneously.
How would that even work?
The concept was likely based on decentralized key management, maybe distributing key shards or relying on time-locked smart contracts. It meant no single centralized police seizure could result in a total loss of escrow funds. It eliminated the temptation of an exit scam and the financial victory of a police raid.
A mechanism designed to neutralize the financial warfare that Operation Bayonet employed. What about transactional privacy?
They made some radical moves there. AlphaBay 2.0 mandated the exclusive use of Monero wallets for transactions. They completely ditched the far more traceable Bitcoin.
So they forced everyone to adopt the strongest privacy coin available.
They did. And they also diversified their presence by offering I2P mirrors, shifting away from total reliance on the Tor network, which is often targeted by monitoring nodes.
And the changes to content, those seemed strategically political, designed to lower their profile.
Precisely. They banned items that had provoked the most aggressive responses from U.S. authorities. Fentanyl, firearms, COVID-19 vaccines, and hitman services were all newly prohibited. This was a clear OPSEC move designed to downgrade the public health and national security risk label that the original site carried.
And they had that very specific ban on political discussions related to Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. That seems less about OPSEC and more about geopolitical positioning.
That ban generated intense speculation. It strongly suggested that the operator, Snake, was based in or had ties to one of those jurisdictions, which might offer some legal insulation from Western law enforcement. By banning criticism of those governments, they were potentially trying to ensure they wouldn't become a political liability in their home base. It was technical, financial, and geopolitical OPSEC all rolled into one.
So, with all that focus on no overkill security, did Snake's resurrected market actually survive?
It lasted about a year and a half. A very short lifespan compared to the original. In early February 2023, AlphaBay 2.0 experienced a partial lockdown.
What happened?
The market relied on a security measure known as a canary, a digitally signed message that proves the market administrator is alive and still in control. It prevents the market from being run by a compromised entity. Snake failed to sign that canary message in time.
The ultimate failure of OPSEC 2.0 was an administrative oversight of the security measures themselves.
A stunning administrative catastrophe. Because the security canary wasn't signed, the system automatically entered a defensive lockdown. Staff and users with two-factor authentication were completely locked out. With the market owner missing the deadline and staff unable to access core functions, AlphaBay 2.0 de facto ceased operations.
So the unbustable market wasn't taken down by an international police sting.
No. It was taken down by its own elaborate security protocols due to a simple failure of human maintenance. It ended not with a bang like the original, but with a quiet technical whimper.
The irony is just, it's so rich. The original failed because of a Hotmail address. The successor failed because a key was unsigned. The human element, whether it's through hubris or simple administrative failure, remains the inescapable Achilles heel of any centralized digital empire. This has been a fascinating deep dive into how law enforcement successfully tackled the single greatest aggregation of dark web crime we've ever seen. If we recap the main lessons, we see that dramatic vulnerability inherent in any centralized market, all due to simple human error, Alexandra Cazes' Hotmail address paving the way.
And that error just facilitated the brilliance of Operation Bayonet. The core strategic genius was pivoting from mere site disruption to large-scale intelligence extraction. The Hansa Honeypot was arguably the most effective strategic maneuver in the history of darknet interdiction. It forced criminals to realize that their perceived resilience could be weaponized against them.
That psychological blow was substantial, but the criminal economy hasn't just vanished. So what does this massive victory mean for law enforcement strategy today?
Law enforcement has learned to rely heavily on two things. One is deep international cooperation, secured via entities like Europol. The other is advanced financial tracing through blockchain forensics, which just continues to evolve. And this forces criminals today toward greater OPSEC, but also toward greater decentralization and specialization to avoid creating a target the size of AlphaBay.
You mentioned STYX Market earlier, for example, focusing almost exclusively on financial fraud data. That seems like a direct attempt to dilute the risk, to break up the large, easy-to-target entity into smaller, niche, less visible operations.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to consider. The massive global intelligence harvest from the Hansa Honeypot provided law enforcement with years of actionable leads, resulting in hundreds of arrests worldwide. If AlphaBay was the Amazon of the dark web, and its fall created this massive compromised address book for police, what happens to the thousands of smaller, niche, and increasingly private markets that continue to fragment and specialize today?
Does breaking the criminal economy into all these decentralized, specialized cells actually make it inherently safer for the criminals?
It certainly makes it harder to find. Fragmentation means that law enforcement can't apply a single devastating Operation Bayonet-style strike. It ensures that the cat-and-mouse game never truly ends, it just gets quieter. The Hydra has learned that the best defense is not to consolidate, but to continuously divide.
So that even if one head is cut off,
the network of specialized operations is too numerous, too small and too fragmented for complete eradication. The challenge shifts from taking down a giant to prosecuting 1,000 smaller skirmishes.
A fascinating and perhaps permanent shift in the architecture of organized cybercrime. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.